Shalom. Welcome. I'm Rabbi Scott with Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue. This is our midweek Torah study, studying through the Parshiot of the Torah. This week we are in Vayakhel. He assembled from Shemot, from Exodus chapter 35, verse 1 through chapter 38, verse 20. We'll begin with a summary, but before I do that, a little bit of business matters. A couple of reminders for you. One, if you would like to subscribe to our channel, to our YouTube channel, then you will get notifications of when we post these videos. We also post our Shabbat service videos, so you can see the Shabbat services. Those are also posted. And likewise, on your screen, you will see in the description of the video, and in the description you will find my email address. You're free to connect with me, email me questions, comments, thoughts, and so forth. I enjoy that immensely, so we look forward to any contact that any of you would like to make. Further, if any of you want to join our services, if any of you are in Fort Myers or visiting Fort Myers, in that case, you're welcome to join us. We are open for in-person services. We are open for in-person services, and we would enjoy meeting you. So you can look us up online and come. Our services are Saturday morning, Shabbat, 11 a.m. We thank all of you who are supporting this ministry, who continue to give faithfully to this ministry. If you're interested in partnering with us in the work of the kingdom and the work of the gospel, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile, we are grateful for your support, especially during these times. You will find a link to Easy Tithe, which is how we do our online giving and collections and people who want to tithe to us or give to us. So we're just very grateful for that and so forth. And we ask Adonai that he would bless those who give in faith, especially during these days. I think that covers everything for my announcements, and so let's begin. Vayakhel, this week's Parshat, Moses Vayakhel assembled the people to teach them the Torah that was received on the mountain. The first topic is the Shabbat and observing the Shabbat. This is to be a day of complete rest, that whoever does any work on that day is to be put to death. Moses added the prohibition that there was to be no fire kindled in your homes on the Shabbat, from Shemot, Exodus chapter 35, verse 3. You are not to kindle fire in any of your homes on Shabbat. The tradition and practice as developed before the day of rest begins is the kindling of the Shabbat candles. The woman of the home will light the candles 18 minutes before sundown. The blessing over the candles is said after lighting. Technically, the Shabbat begins, the Shabbat blessing, the blessing over the candles is the beginning of the Shabbat, as there is no kindling fire on the Shabbat. So the kindling of fire is the last thing done on the Friday, Erev Shabbat, the evening, and then the Shabbat begins after that candle is lit. The day of rest actually begins with the blessing of the light. And in the same way, of course, what was the first thing that Adonai created? He created light. Moses details the voluntary collection for the construction and assembly of the Mishkan. And then we go through that, and we have Bezalel and Oholiav are named as leading the work. Bezalel is given out as an example of Yeshua. We'll talk more about that in this week and next week's Parsha. From chapter 35 of Shemot of Exodus, verse 30. See, Adonai has singled out Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Yehuda. He has filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge concerning every kind of artisanry. There is a mythology that Yeshua was a carpenter. I say mythology, perhaps that's a little strong word for some. I mean that in an academic sense, that there is a legend, if you will, a myth, if you will, of that Yeshua was a carpenter. He was a craftsman. This is probably a safe conclusion from Mark chapter 6. Isn't he just the carpenter, the son of Miriam, the brother of Yaakov and Yossi? Yehuda and Shimon aren't his sisters with us, said the skeptics, and they took offense at him. This from Mark chapter 6. In Greek, the word here is tektone, meaning a craftsman, typically a craftsman of wood. There's different words that are used for craftsmen of stone and so forth. There is a Talmudic reference that would discuss the word nagar, which is Aramaic, which is a craftsman, but using the word craftsman metaphorically as someone who is very learned, someone who's educated, somebody who's learned. In fact, perhaps even a leader of the community. However, the term nagar is not found in Aramaic or in Hebrew in the New Testament period. It's a later word. It's found later in the Talmudic texts, where the word craftsman is used metaphorically as a skilled handler of the Word of God. So while it might be nice to say, the word that Yeshua was actually a skilled handler of the Word of God because he was called a nagar, wouldn't be historically accurate. He would not have been called a nagar because they would not have used that word during that time in history. It was a word that was found later. The language and idioms do not strongly support that Yeshua was anything more than a woodworking carpenter. But that's not to diminish the work of a craftsman. Here we have an example, many examples in the text here in our portion of a juxtaposition of the Mishkan and the Shabbat. The Mishkan is the tabernacle, and the Shabbat is, of course, the day of rest. We have this again here in this passage in this parsha. First, we have the Shabbat, then the instructions about the Mishkan, building the Mishkan. So it's like first the Shabbat and then the great building project, because of course you wouldn't build on the Shabbat. So we're declaring and proclaiming and observing and keeping the Shabbat. And then we've got a great building project. What is the building project that's detailed in the parsha here? It is, of course, the Mishkan. But that should be an echo that should remind us of something. And when in the text, when in the Torah, do we see a Shabbat followed by a great building project, by something significant being built? Well, remember in Genesis we had the Shabbat, and the next thing we see is that Adonai made the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is a type of the Mishkan in this sense. It is something that is built following the Shabbat and built following the creation. I'd like to look at this from the perspective of a word, and that word would be sanctification, when something is sanctified. And let's look at it from this perspective. What is the highest form of reinvention that we could attain? For example, if I were to take a sheep and I were to harvest the wool from the sheep, I cut off the excess wool and I card it and I spin it and I dye it and I weave it and then I knit it and presto, I have a sweater. There's a children's picture book that tells the story of a little boy's new sweater, and he goes from his sheep and he takes the wool from the sheep and he goes through every step. It's a book that I remember from my childhood. Can't remember what the name of it is right now, but just a delightful story. Again, what have we done? We've taken one thing, a sheep, a lamb, and we've ended up with a sweater. This wool that was excess or extra or even had a purpose, we've taken it and we've repurposed it and ended up with a sweater. If I were to harvest timber, if I were to cut it and plane it and sand it and join it and finish it, and I end up with a piece of furniture, what have I done? I have reinvented the timber. I've reinvented the tree and created something different from the tree. What is the highest form of reinvention? What would be the highest example of reinvention that we could talk about? It would be to take raw materials and reinvent them and sanctify them into the form of the Mishkan, or even later, the temple. Sanctification is a process of reinvention. We are reinventing things. That's what sanctification kind of means in a functional sense. The process of taking a created thing and recreating it or reinventing it, repurposing it for another purpose. If I am alive, I live and breathe and I go and I do. I am alive. But when I live a sanctified life, when this becomes sanctified, then my life that I live and breathe and go and do, I live and breathe and go and do differently. I have been repurposed. I have been reinvented. I have been recreated. The sanctification of the Shabbat is the first step of a cessation of work. It is taking the day and setting it aside as holy. It is repurposing a day on the calendar of the cycle, the life cycle of the week. We have this in the Hebrew, Sheshet Yamim Te'aseh Melacha, work, Melacha. Uvayom Hashve'i Yeh Lachem Kadosh Shabbat, Shabbaton Ladonai Kol Ha'oseh Vo Melacha Yumat, work, who does no, there should be no work on it. On 6 days, work is to be done. This is from chapter 35 of Shemot, verse 2. On 6 days, work is to be done, but the seventh day is a day that is holy for you, a Shabbat of complete rest, Shabbat Shabbaton, in honor of Adonai. Whoever does any work, Melecha, whoever does any work on it is to be put to death. And then what does it say in the next line? That was chapter 35 of Shemot, Exodus, verse 2. Look what it says in the very next line, verse 3. Lo teva aru esh bechol mishovatechem bayom haShabbat. You're not to kindle a fire in any of your homes on Shabbat, or on the day of Shabbat. This Hebrew word, melacha, work, it is the word that is used in creation when Adonai finished his work, the melacha that he had made, from Vayikra. This is what this work is. It is the act of creating, or the act of sorting and combining and purposing. And then it is the very day itself that becomes repurposed. Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 19, says this, verse 30, keep my Shabbats and revere my sanctuary. I am Adonai. Et Shabbatotei tishmaru umikdash tira'u ani Adonai. Keep my Shabbats and revere my sanctuary. Again, Vayikra chapter 26, et Shabbatotei tishmaru umikdashi tira'u ani Adonai. So we see the Torah is connecting the Shabbat and the sanctuary. Keep my Shabbats and revere my sanctuary, it says. In the previous parsha, we see Exodus chapter 31, therefore you are to keep my Shabbat, because it is set apart for you. Everyone who treats it as ordinary must be put to death, for whoever does any work on it is to be cut off from his people. You are to keep my Shabbat. It is set apart for you. It is something that is designated to the people of the covenant. One argument would be that the day is set aside for you to keep, and that if you don't, you cease to be who you are. In other words, if you treat it as an ordinary day, then you as a people become ordinary. If you treat it as a special day and do not do the things you normally do, then you will be a people who do not do the things that normal people do. Do you see that? That's sanctification. When something is set aside as holy, then it becomes repurposed so that it does holy things. And it is the doing of holy things that sets the thing aside to be holy. Let me say this again. It is, you are to keep my Shabbat, speaking to the children of Israel and the people of Adonai. You are to keep my Shabbat. It is set apart for you. It is something that is designated to the people of the covenant, that the day would be set aside for you to keep, and that if you don't keep it, you cease to be who you are. If you treat the day as ordinary, that is, if you melacha, if you work on it, if you profane it, if you defile it, if you treat it as ordinary, then you will be an ordinary people. And that's why it has to be, the people have to be sanctified and set apart, and the person who does not keep the Shabbat will be cut off from his people. Okay, treat as ordinary. Mahalecha, to profane, defile, or pollute. How do you profane a day? That we're talking about the Shabbat here. How do you profane a day? This translation, which is probably the Living Translation, or the Tree of Life version, rather, sorry. Everyone who treats it as ordinary, treat it as ordinary, or to defile or to pollute. How do you pollute a day? How do you pollute a period of time? Remember, the ground was polluted before the flood because of people's sin. At Sodom, Adonai poured out fire even on the crops and on the ground. Even the ground had become polluted. How do you? So we know how to pollute a ground, an area, but how do you pollute a period of time? How does that work? What is that we would pollute a period of time? Well, I would explain it this way, that it is a period of time that is a window into heaven, the realm of Adonai. It is as if the Shabbat is a window into eternity. And as such, what we're doing is we're casting an aspersion. It's like saying a curse on the future, or we're saying a curse on eternity, or we're saying a curse on heaven when we bring defilement into the Shabbat. Okay, is the Shabbat just for the people of Israel? Shabbat is a sign of the covenant between Adonai and the people. In Shemot, Exodus chapter 31, it says this, Adonai said to Moshe, tell the people of Israel, you are to observe my Shabbats, for this is a sign between me and you throughout all your generations, so that you will know that I am Adonai, who sets you apart from me. What is this? This is a sign. A sign is a sign for other people, and a sign is a marker for both parties in a covenant. When we do a covenant, when we purchased our house, there was a copy that went to the lender and there was a copy that went to us. Those copies of that transaction, that mortgage document, those are a sign to both parties of the covenant that the covenant is in force, and that this is in force until it is satisfied. Well, the covenant between Adonai and the people of Adonai, the people of God, people of Israel, and those who were grafted in with them, the sign is this, that is the Shabbat. The Shabbat is a sign of the covenant that we have entered into. It says this, you are to observe my Shabbats, for this is a sign between me and you through all your generations, so that you will know that I am Adonai, who sets you apart for me. And so it's completely speaking of a covenanted people here who are set aside. And in that sense, this verse specifically is not talking about a sign to the nations or a sign to the peoples. It's talking about a sign to you and to him, to Adonai, between me and you through all your generations, so that you will know that I am Adonai. So that you will know, and you will be reminded that I am Adonai. What is the essence of the covenant from his perspective? What is the essence of the covenant from Adonai's side of the table? If two parties arrive at a table and they're going to agree on a covenant, they're going to cut a covenant, and so they are opposite of each other at the table. What do you need to know? What is the first thing you need to know in a covenant? Who are the parties? What is your standing here? If I were to sell you my house and we were to draw up a contract and you were to buy my house, the first thing I have to do is show proof that I own this house. I am the house owner. What does Adonai say in this? He says, Ani Adonai, or Anachi Adonai. I am Adonai, who sets you apart from me. It is a declaration of who he is. It is a declaration of his identity. This is the party who sits down opposite to us at the table of the covenant. And this is the sign between me and you throughout your generations. The sign of the covenant is the Shabbat. Okay, let's talk about this idea of being cut off from the people. This almost like a punishment. What is the punishment of not keeping the Shabbat? To be cut off from the people. Well, one quick way to understand that would be, and this is, I think this is valid and quickly derived at from the text, and that is that being cut off from the people is a way of preserving the uniqueness of the people, which is a way of preserving the covenant. In other words, if we don't cut off those people who refuse to keep the Shabbat, then we have ceased to be a special people, and Adonai has ceased to be special to us, and this whole thing begins to disintegrate and dissolve before our very eyes. It is why earlier we talked about this idea of profaning the period of time, that the period of time had been profaned, that if you profane this thing that was designated to be holy and stuff, then you cease to be a holy people. And so if you don't cut off those people who are not keeping the Shabbat, then you sacrifice your entire people as being holy, because you've made everyone ordinary, because we're not a people who keep the Shabbat. All right, so another item that I think this maybe we'll finish up here, and we'll see how we do. Another item I want to look at is the idea of this Mishkan. The Mishkan is the tabernacle, the tent that Moses assembled. We're in the middle of talking about the Mishkan, the sanctuary. And in Exodus, Shemot, chapter 25, verse 8 says this, they are to make me a sanctuary. They are to make me a sanctuary. We are to make this place for Adonai, so that I may live among them, is the way it reads in this translation, which again I think is Tree of Life version. They are to make me a sanctuary so that I may live among them. If the Mishkan was an echo of the Garden of Eden, perhaps the Mishkan is so Adonai would dwell among them. Remember the purpose of the garden. One of the purposes of the Garden of Eden could be argued that it was a place for Adonai to dwell among man. This is highly possible, and makes the most sense that the sanctuary of the Mishkan is this echo of the Garden of Eden. The purpose is so that Adonai can come and dwell among his people Israel. Not since the garden have we seen a direct person to Elohim relationship. We've seen lots of promises and covenants. We've seen Noah, of course, who was the savior of the world through the ark, and bringing his family. But then from there we see Abraham, and we see Isaac and Jacob. We see Job is somewhere in there, somewhere in the timeline. He's not directly referenced from the Torah, but he's somewhere in the timeline. But nowhere do you see Adonai dwelling among Abraham, or Adonai dwelling with Isaac, or Adonai dwelling with Jacob or Joseph. Not with Noah, not with Enoch. Nowhere in the previous text do we have an example of Adonai abiding with, in the midst of, from Mithalech becherev machanecha. For Adonai, your God, moves about in your camp. Vehaya mechanecha kadosh velo yere vecha ervat davar veshav ma'achrecha. For Adonai moves among you. In Genesis chapter 3, we've got this. They heard the voice of Adonai walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Time of the evening breeze is how it reads in some. Vayishme'u et kol Adonai Elohim mithalech bagan lurach hayom. This is what is offered here. That Adonai moves about in your camp. It says from Devarim, from chapter 23, verse 15. In the same way that they heard Adonai moving about in the garden. Since the Shabbat is a sign of the special relationship between Adonai and the Bnei Israel, and of the shared experience between the two, as evidenced by the phrase holy for you and holy to Adonai, this special place and time must be guarded carefully. This is, I'm quoting Rabbi at Shalom. who said this. The newly introduced phrase is Shmirat Shabbat takes on new meaning in this, as opposed to just merely avoiding work. It is the listen and behold and understand the Shabbat. Speaking of it from a Messianic perspective, again quoting at Shalom, since Shabbat is a sign of the special relationship between God and the Bnei Israel, of the shared experience between the two, as experienced by holy for you and holy to Adonai, this special place and time must be guarded carefully. Consider this from the perspective of Yeshua in the relationship with his Father. The Shabbat would have been a sign of the special relationship between Adonai and Yeshua, of the shared experience between the two. And you could truly have said this, holy unto you and holy unto Adonai, and fulfill the verse, and fulfill the verse in that way. This, speaking from a Messianic perspective, you cannot be both a believer in Yeshua and not be sanctified. If you do not live a holy life, you'll be cut off. To be cut off is to pollute the ground of the presence of Adonai. Rather, in our hearts, through the Ruach, how we find our sanctification is being accomplished on our behalf. It is something that is being accomplished on our behalf in the same way that Bezalel and Aholiab constructed the temple on behalf of the people of Israel. We're going to conclude there. Once again, we'll be skipping ahead to the Pikudei real quickly and going through that with you. Again, just appreciate all of you, and if you would like to reach out with any questions or comments, would enjoy that discussion very much. May Adonai bless you this week and comfort you and be a blessing to you and your families. Shalom, shalom.